What we want to be doing for each of these kinds of resources is essentially, sorry for that on the recording. We want to, for each kind of resource, bedrock resources, climate resources, soundscape resources, on down the list, right? We've gotten as far as wildlife. In whatever word composition format you would like, we're basically going to adopt the format and the structure and order of our discussions in class here, lectures and stuff like that, our explorations on the field trip, in like a couple of sentences. Let me know, what is the resource? Kind of take an inventory for your chosen national park, resource by resource. Within that section for that resource, so soils, I've got boreal forest entosols, I've got kaolinitic ultisols, I've got prairie mollisols at my park, covering the whole thing. Or I've got riverine habitat stuff in this one riparian corridor, and all of the rest is desert soils. 1 to 2 sentences, right? Doesn't have to be an essay. These are short because we have so many different kinds of resources, okay? Now, in practice, when you go to the Park Service website, pull up the specific site for your chosen park and look up the general management plan in the management and science section of your park's website, that general management plan might be 500 pages long with 3,000 pages of appendices and tables and references and maps, because they can't characterize that stuff in 1 to 2 sentences to any functional level. But for our purposes in this class, we got to keep it short, got to keep it sweet, and so give me the basic rundown, right? Identify those 2, 3, 4 really key interest species when you're doing the wildlife section of this, all right? Let me know what they are. And in 1 to 2 sentences for that list, you don't really have a lot of time to talk about the specific dynamics of each. So if it's pretty obvious, like Park talked about loons in class, and I've got loons at my park, you can just list loons. I'll kind of get what the specific fragility of them is. If it's not so straightforward, if you got some exotic species you've never heard of and you think I might never have heard of, let me know in a phrase or half of a sentence what that particular species deal is. Why is it sensitive? Why do we care about it? Something like that, okay? Second section for each of your different classes of resource. What are the impact patterns and dynamics specific to your park? If you have a mostly desert-y park and like drought-resistant succulent vegetation, people love to carve on that stuff. You saw some examples of that in the vegetation section. If you have a Midwest Ozarks park, there's not a lot of stuff, maybe some beech trees or some river birch, white birch, that people might be carving on here and there, but not quite the same as in some desert places on broad-bladed plants, okay? Let me know what the impact patterns are. And for wildlife, give me an impact pattern maybe for each of those 3 or 4 species, whatever you pick out of the full list of species present. Okay? Is it super fragile? Like fragile to the point that, the park has already had to cut off visitor access to this particular species? Is it, if the resource is bedrock and there's not really an impact pattern period, that's a pretty easy answer. It's 1 sentence. There's no impact evident for bedrock at my park. Just It's not a concern. Okay? Sometimes no is a valid answer. So, characterize it, inventory it in 1 to 2 sentences. Impact patterns and dynamics. A couple of sentences. Couple sentences for moderating, mitigating factors. So if you're talking about, you've already finished talking about bedrock, let's say, you're talking about soils at your park. And your park is a desert park, flat out. Then if you're talking about the soil resource in this section, and it's a desert soil, and every once in a while your park gets these just devastating, like, hard rains. Not a desert monsoon that triggers a super bloom, but like intensified storm that just causes flood walls, flash floods, and those dry arroyos and stuff like that. That's not a soil resource. It is a factor from another resource, water, that affects this particular resource. Let me know what those are. So for each resource, take a quick stroll through the other resources and see if they influence that, right? So if soil quality, soil index is very poor across your national park, it's just a hard place to grow and live, well, that's going to affect vegetation resources quite a bit. So in the vegetation section, let me know that soil productivity is very, very poor. And that's something that park managers got to be really aware of, because that puts the vegetation on pretty unsteady footing. Okay? For each of the key things that you characterize, so 2, 3, 4 key wildlife species you select, for each of those, let me know 3 management techniques in order, formatted as strategy and tactic. And we haven't gone through that list yet. We're not quite there in the semester, so maybe just leave an open line on your sort of proto-management report, just kind of open for that. And that's kind of it for each one. Okay? So for bedrock, about 4 paragraphs. For soils, about 4 paragraphs. 4 short paragraphs, right? For some of these, if it makes more sense to characterize it as a list instead of sentences, I get the idea. If it doesn't say the 3 most sensitive or key species for management efforts at my park are A, B, and C, you can just give me a bulleted list of A, B, and C. Like, I am so smart, SMRT, like Homer Simpson once saying. I'll get what you're saying without the extra words. So if you hate writing, that's okay. Bulleted list. Bulleted list. And for the management techniques as well, you can do these as a bulleted list. I don't need paragraphs and paragraphs of, oh, well, we're going to do this management technique because XYZ. Just let me know. I'm going to increase supply, and I'm going to increase supply in effective terms. Increase supply as a strategy, in effective terms as the tactic. Or strategy is I'm going to limit use, and tactic is seasonal closure at trailhead. Something like that. Again, we'll go through those strategies and tactics kind of right after we finish up with all these different types of resources. Okay? So, you could probably get 3, maybe 4 if you're very efficient resources written up with these 4 things on each page. So this isn't going to be a huge, long, killer management plan. Those are, in the real world, 5-year, multi-million-dollar efforts that can run into the thousands of pages. And I just don't have it in me to crush your souls like that. So we're going to pare this down to the absolute bare metal minimum elements of what actually matters in the report. Okay? Question, comment?
I missed the beginning for resources.
Yeah.
Do you want that to be like working up from like bedrock, soil, stuff like that, or
Yep.
do you want it could be anything? Or
It's
do you want
each of them in order. Yeah.
Okay.
So we did like larger scale landscape stuff first, like topography, topology, landscape, and geography. So those 4 together, you can talk about them individually or as one big one if you want to roll them together. And that would be these 4 short paragraphs, or a couple of bulleted lists and a couple of sentences, right? So that's those 4, and then the middle of the page is bedrock, and then the bottom of the page is soils. So working up the list in this kind of the same order that we have so far. We're doing that on purpose because soil depends on bedrock, bedrock depends on landscape and geography and so forth. Okay? Cool. All right. So that's enough work for the first half of our semester. And if you've been going back to the Park Service website with each of these different classes of resources, just kind of peek in there and see what's available. You've probably already seen everything you need to answer these things in enough detail, right? A bulleted list of 3 species, not that hard. So if anybody does get stuck or confused or anything like that, by all means, don't be shy. I'm not going to bite your head off about it. And that's what, like an hour's work to get through all of those, maybe, for everything we've done so far. So I'm trying to keep the paperwork load on this class as low as I can, but we'll prepare ourselves. We are loading the gun to fire at some management scenarios and what ifs and goofy questions at the end of the semester. So in order to do that, get to know your resources in a structured, regular way, like they do in the real world, and we'll get after it at the end of the semester. Okay? Cool. Any questions? All right, let's end a couple minutes early. Yeah, question?
When did you want this done by?
Kind of just put each of these sections together as we go through that section, right? So up through wildlife so far, and if you guys would like some easy grades, we can agree as a class to pass in what you develop up to this point, like next week, let's say. Or if you prefer to just procrastinate and load it on at the end of the semester, okay, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. But some people like lots of smaller, easier deadlines along the way to keep the stress low. So what would you guys like to do with that as you're packing up? Small deadlines, big deadline.
Personally, I like to just knock it all out at once, but I'm up for whatever you guys want.
Oh, procrastinator by nature. Yeah.
Well, all right then. So this is the template. Throw stuff in there or throw it all together in one horrible night later on if you want, but that's where we're going with it for now. Okay? Cool. See you next time.